For some of you, these slides might be difficult to see, so I'll read some of the text. Don't worry about it. We've got about 30 minutes. My hope is to rush through some slides and then let you ask the really tough questions. There isn't a question you shouldn't ask. Doesn't mean I'll have the answer, but please do ask the question. I couldn't think of a title because I got an email that said it was a Changemakers Breakfast, and I was like, I remember talking to my daughter. I said, I don't think of myself as that, and I don't want to go down to South Carolina and be a New Yorker that's coming to tell them about change. That's silly. That is silly. And I see that. I was just telling Phil, we do work overseas, and I see that when I go overseas, people from the United States and Europe come in and telling other people how to live their lives. I'm like, I can't do that. But then last night, Bev was giving me a ride back, and she said something 3 times, and I said, that's the title. She said, how do we do better for kids? So the title to this slide is, how do we do better for kids? But before we get there, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, because from the day I landed here at 1 o'clock yesterday, I've been asked at least 10 times where I'm from, including at coffee this morning. And I guess it's okay, because in New York, my accent doesn't matter. But here, it's a curiosity. I'm the son of a very young Buddhist monk that had a salvation experience, gave up the robes, and married a Sephardic Jewish British family. My mom is British. They became medical missionaries. They went to train in Sweden, adopted 4 children and 3 biological. I'm the oldest of the biological children. We grew up in Emporia, Kansas, a small rural community 100 miles from Kansas City. That's where I came of age. And the young lady that checked me in yesterday at the Charleston Place Hotel was from Emporia, Kansas. Can you believe this? It's crazy. All I wanted to be was a military officer. On my mom's side, I have 3 generations of British military. And I enrolled in ROTC, I went to Fort Riley, but while I was there, my captain asked me to volunteer in a group home. I'd never been to a group home, I had no idea what it was. There were 14 boys in this home, and on that first night, I realized that they didn't think of home as I did. In fact, they couldn't think of home, because they thought of that house they lived in as the closest thing to home, and the other 13 young men there were family. And I was stunned by that, really stunned by that. I came back, I started working there. And, but then my father, who is Asian, had a problem with what he thought I was doing, even though he had done things differently to his family. He said, you know, you need to do more. And in Asian society, you are a doctor, attorney, lawyer, maybe a public servant, and then you're the Taliban. There's really nothing in the middle there, right? So I said, you know, Dad, I don't want to be a doctor like you. I don't want to be, that's not my thing. I'll be a neuropsychologist. So I did go to New York. I got a PhD. I practiced as a neuropsychologist. I hated it. And I called my mom one day, and she said, why do you listen to your dad? I said, well, Mom, you know, I'm the oldest. I want to make you guys happy. She said, listen, just go do something you like to do. And here I am, doing something I like to do. I am also a dad. So a lot of what I'm going to talk to you today comes from my experience of being a father myself to Nicholas, Jordan, and Abigail. So we're going to do a couple things. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the organization. I've told you a little bit about myself. I'm going to tell you how we see the problem. I'm going to ask you to stop, at some point, try to stop the intellectual understanding of the problem and see whether you can understand it viscerally. because this work is about the heart. And then I'm going to run through a couple slides and tell you of the things that we've learned in our work that inspire us every day. And this is the work that I do with my team that allows us to get up every morning and say, we can do this. We can do hard work, and this is hard work. So, the Children's Village was founded in 1851. It's not an orphanage. I know the story is different here. You only came to Children's Village if you were arrested for a crime. And most of the crimes were survival crimes in New York City. Food, mostly. So these were the Oliver Twist stories of New York City, right? Not the London experience. We had 1,200 kids when the campus was in Manhattan. We also influenced the Indian schools. The immersion education program of the Indian schools came out of the Children's Village experience. How many of you have heard of the Orphan Train? The Orphan Train was founded by the Children's Village and 2 large New York City charities that still exist today. There's a 6-volume book on the children that went from Children's Village on the Orphan Train. The first train from New York were children that went from Children's Village. 250,000 children from New York, Boston, and Philadelphia were taken to Chicago and then all the way down to Nebraska and given to families. Less than 40% of them were truly orphans. They were mostly non-English speaking European immigrants, Ashkenazi Jews, and later some Catholic children. The Orphan Train continues until 1929. That's recent history, my friends. Harlem Dowling, the agency that is part of us, was the first African American institution in the United States founded for African American children, and the first institution that was burnt in New York City during the draft riots. Still exists, and it's one of our pride and joy. You can't see this slide, so I'll tell you a little bit about what you should know about the organization today. We are no longer residential. Residential care makes up about 30% of our work. We serve in 43 public schools. We do a lot of prevention. We do a lot of community building. The median age of the youngsters that we serve in residential care is almost 17 now. We are responsible for about 3,600 children on any given night in the greater New York City area. We serve in Haiti, Iraq, El Salvador, at the southern border on family finding. And this is something I'm really proud about. Because in New York City, housing is a real crisis, and because children that age out of the system are constantly in shelters, we've started building in Manhattan, and we've proved that you can actually build studio apartments in the city that are beautiful, that can rent for $65 a month. And our next big project in Manhattan, which is almost 60% complete, will bring 2-bedroom apartments on market for under $550 a month. Where you live matters, where you go to school matters, who you're born to matters. Those 3 things have defined our experience in this room. And we owe it to the people we serve to give them the things that we give ourselves, right? So here's the problem in the United States, and this is something that I learned in that group home so long ago, and something that I keep learning from my mother, who is still alive, that reminds me, family separation is a problem. Family separation is a problem. Families are not perfect, but when you take children away from the only thing they trust, it's a problem. Now, to those of us in this room, this slide is not new. But to all our friends, they think that when we think of foster care, when we talk of child welfare, they think of abuse. Well, that's not true. We have 33 years of data in the United States that comes pretty close to this number every year. 75% of the children we remove from families, we remove for neglect, not for abuse. Abuse is a tiny, tiny piece of of the family separation paradigm. And sexual abuse is even smaller. Neglect, which is often closely associated with poverty, is the reason that we remove children. There are two powerful drivers in the United States that allow us to do this. One is this idea that poor people are different to us. That poor people don't care about their children as we do. When I was in Kansas and I remembered in that group home, not being a social worker, I remember going to the staff and they all love their job and they're my friends to this day and they're amazing people. I said, hey, what's the deal? Why aren't these kids home? Like, why are they here on Thanksgiving and why am I like here? They were like, well, you know, their families don't care. Their families are lazy. They don't want to drive to have Thanksgiving with these children. We were wrong. They didn't want to come because they didn't think they were welcome. I learned that the next year that I was there. This idea that poor people don't care for their children the way we do is a powerful driver in our system. So you can't see this slide either. When the system was entirely white at Children's Village, and the kids were Ashkenazi Jews, non-English speaking European immigrants, there were no kids of color, nobody cared if you were a kid of color and you were poor. You could be dead on the street or in jail. These kids, their parents were also seen, and here I have it talks about the then president of Children's Village talking about these kids as broken, their families as lazy, as delinquent, and he even uses the phrase, and this is in our board minutes, feeble-minded. Feeble-minded. When I came to Children's Village, this is the first picture I took of boys, a group of boys, almost 100 of them. The New York Times wrote an article about these young men that all spent more than 10 years in the residential care system. They were all over 14. And we put them as a cohort into a group and said, we're going to find these kids' families. Every one of these young men had a label, oppositional, defiant. I remember going to my chief psychiatrist and said, what the hell, what exactly does that mean? Like, that's something my father would have called me when I said I didn't want to be a doctor. What does that exactly mean? They all had the label oppositional, defiant. My point? We label things easily when we think people are very different to us. Let's over there. Labels are powerful. You know, in psychology, we call them mental schema. When you create a schematic in your head about a group of people, you can do terrible things to them because you stop thinking of them as individuals. So when we see poor families struggling and we make assumptions about their love, it is easy for us to justify removal. When we see poor families struggling and we make assumptions about their love for their children, it's easy to justify removal. Here's the second big driver in our system, and you know this, race. Race. While the vast majority of children separated from their families in the United States are still poor and white, the disproportionate impact is on kids of color. With black families being separated faster, their children entering the system faster, going up the levels of security faster, they stay longer, they exit with the worst outcomes. 26 years of data. No question about that. Only one other group in the United States come close to the black family's experience. Tribal children. In every one of our tribes, we see the same data. In every one of our tribes. With the black family, the labels are no different. The labels are, they don't care, they're not trying hard enough, they're very unlike me. We can do better. Removal is always followed by this idea that we can do better. So this is not an issue of intent here. I'm not suggesting that people out there are just attacking families. What I'm saying is we are often misguided because of the way we think about that family. Black families are often described as damaged, dangerous to children, dangerous to communities, untrustworthy, taking advantage of systems, and then you end up with this idea, well, if all those are true, let's save their children. If you come to the Children's Village and you come with me to Columbia University, they maintain our records from 1848 on. Every one of these concepts was applied to Ashkenazi Jewish children, to Catholic children, and to non-Anglo immigrant children that came from Eastern Europe, because they were seen as different. There's a letter that was sent to our board president that says Children's Village integrated its Manhattan campus in 1860. And there's a letter that says, you know, first you brought the Jews, then you brought the Catholics that worship the Pope. Now you brought the blacks. That's it, you got to go. That's the content of the letter. Same feeling. Right? And I think it said, you brought the Jews that crucified Christ, I think is what it said. So, we save kids. We separate them. Now here is where this gets technical. You have all these young kids in the system, many of them under 13. In some of the backward residential programs, we see a lot more under 13-year-old kids still in the system. I've been to some of those places. But very quickly, these kids, as they age up, they become the bad kids. There are movies made about them. There are stories written about them. There are TikTok videos about them. I kid you not. What happens? How do the kids we saved from those bad parents so quickly become the bad kids? There's a reason for why this is happening. There's a reason why there are movies about kids coming out of foster care that are struggling. Right? You've seen these movies, right? Some of them are pretty well known. Go back with me to Psych 101, Maslow's hierarchy. You get the physiological. You're born, you breathe some air, you're good. Okay, I'm alive. Your mom swaddles you. Those of you who are parents, you know that feeling. You know, I got ya. I remember doing that with Nicholas when he was my firstborn. And then all you know from that moment on is love and belonging. Right? Those of you who are parents, and those of you who are not. You belong, you're loved, you're loved, you're loved. Think of our kids that have been removed. We promise them family, but they don't get it. They age in the system. They age in the system. The absence of love and belonging has consequences. Let's see if we can get this. All the things that we want young people to have. You know, I've spoken to some of our best donors who say, hey, you know, are they going to college? I'm like, no, he's not going to college. But I'm going to keep him out of jail and give him a family. And maybe he'll go to college when he's 25. Because there's so much that he missed that cannot be fixed by money anymore. Money doesn't fix love and belonging. To be loved and belonged and to belong is something you don't understand. Do this with me. Take a deep breath and hold it. Exhale slowly. Now, unless you have asthma or emphysema, you did not think about breathing right now. Until I told you to hold your breath. You were just breathing. That's what it means to be loved and to belong. You don't think about love and belonging because you have it. That's the closest analogy I can give you. We don't think about love because we have it. You don't worry about belonging because you have it. But years ago, a young man told me something that I've never forgotten. He said, I am so afraid I feel like I'm drowning. And that's how I came about that one small exercise. To not know who loves you and to not know who you belong to feels like you're drowning. Feels like you're drowning. And you're in pain. You're in pain. That's all you're thinking about. Who loves me? I remember in that group home that I was at, and at Children's Village, I've seen this. I don't want to talk about Thanksgiving. It's not because I don't want to talk about Thanksgiving. I don't want to be reminded that I'm the only one that doesn't have a home to go to. Or I don't want to be reminded that I'm the only one that will not have someone come and visit me on that Thursday. So don't fucking talk to me. That's what pain feels like. It's incredible pain. It's incredible pain. Now, love and belonging is recognizable once you are attuned to it. Here are some things that you and I take for granted, and that my children, Nicholas, Jordan, and Abigail, take for granted every day, much to their chagrin, because two of them are teenagers and they don't want to be loved that way anymore. One, when you're loved and when you belong, you are included. When you're loved and when you belong, you're treated as important. When you're loved and you belong, you're always supported because you know you've always have someone that's got your back. When you are loved and you belong, you're always encouraged. When you're loved and when you belong, people celebrate you. They celebrate you. Think of all the affirmations you shower on the people you love, even when they don't deserve it. My mom still does that to me. I'm like, Mom, come on. No, it's not that good. When people love you, they listen to you and they embrace you. Now, to those of you who know foster care, think of the children you know right now. Can you tell me that any one of them is getting at least two of these things today? Can I tell you that I have a couple hundred children at Children's Village today that won't get it either? I'm not ashamed to say it. The lack of belonging equals pain, and pain is debilitating. I want to use a word that we probably don't use as often, but that word is perseverate. You know what it means to perseverate? It's when the pain is so great that every morning you wake up, that's the first thing you think about. Think of pain in your own life. When you lost someone, if it's a relationship, someone you loved, and you wake up every morning, and that's all you think about. And it consumes you, and it impacts your thinking. And when people try to get close to you, you push them away because you don't know how to communicate the pain you're going through. It is hard to focus on anything else when that pain is dominant. Our children cannot focus on all the things we tell them and all the things we tell our donors we do because they don't know who they belong to. Okay, belonging is the work we do. If you're not in the belonging game, if you think residential care or foster care is a solution, I'm sorry, my friends, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. Belonging is what we need to fight for. That's the battle. That's the hard work. It's the most difficult work we do. And it's a very simple solution. It's the same thing that worked for you and me. The people that love us give us two qualities of love. One is that unconditional nature, right? Every one of you. If you don't have one person, let me know, because there's always an interesting story. But most of us have at least one. Most of you, as I tell my children, they have people that love them in 3 continents. And some of you probably do too. So you have that concept of unconditional love. The other concept is one we don't talk about, but it's incredibly important. It's not just love. It's intrinsic love. That means that people love you for who you are right now, not for who you'll be. My mom loved me when I told her I was going to do something else. She didn't know what that would be. She loved me. I love my children even when they push me away. Like, Dad, don't park by my dorm and walk up, is what Abby tells me. I'm like, honey, okay, I'll park at the back and I'll walk through the back. Intrinsic love is, I love you for who you are right now, not for who you'll be. With your accent, with your big nose, your big eyes, with your bad habits, I love you. Children need unconditional love, and they need intrinsic love. So many of the children in our system are promised conditional love. Conditional love doesn't fill that hole, my friends, which is why our kids run away. They know it. Kids, I work with young people that have gone through 20 homes, so do you. And in half of those cases, they were like, yeah, that wasn't real. What are they saying? There was no love there. That was another bed. Okay, let's run through some quick slides here. Poverty does not equal child harm. Poverty does not mean trauma. Many of us, me included, my family started really poor. When my dad left the temple, he was excommunicated. And mom and dad started life together with nothing. And many of you have stories of that. Poverty is not the limitation. It's when people intervene in your lives and take away things you love. That's what breaks you down. Poor families love their children. I know that sounds stupid to say, but in our system, we need to be reminded of this. Poor families love their children just as you and I do. Poor families enjoy deeply fulfilling lives. They may be poor, but they have amazing lives. Child welfare is not a solution to poverty. It never was. It's a lie. It's a lie. I know I fall into that trap too sometimes, thinking, yeah, we can do something more. Child welfare is not a solution to poverty. It's not a surgical instrument. It's a blunt instrument that is harmful, even when it's well-intended. Neglect in our system is primary, not abuse. I insist on reminding myself not to use the phrase abuse and neglect when I speak. It's neglect and abuse. Big difference. Another phrase that we use at Children's Village is, we don't work with bad kids. We work with kids to whom bad things have happened. It's a subtle difference there, but we don't work with bad kids. We work with kids to whom bad things have happened. Substance abuse dependence confounds neglect. I threw this in here because I know we have some providers. This is a tricky one. We work with a lot of upper middle class and wealthy families in our work because New York City and New York State has a lot of diversity. In middle class and upper middle class families, substance abuse doesn't always lead to a removal because the family or the person has a lot of support around them. But in socially isolated family units, the problem with substance abuse is that 2 things could happen. One is you could be alone without support, and you need the drug so much that you open the door to a stranger that could put your children at risk. Because children are always at risk when strangers are not supervised, right? That's true to all our families. Not that all strangers are bad. It's just that if you're with my children and you're a stranger, you're supervised. So you open the door because someone says, I'll bring it. I've got it. Let's do it together. But you've got children there. The second problem is the draw of the drug could become so strong that you make that momentary lapse in judgment to say, my kids will be okay. Let me close this door and I'll go out and I'll get it and I'll come back. A lot of things could happen as you go out. You may not come back. You may come back and you may bring back the wrong people again into your home. So substance abuse definitely confounds this problem of neglect. Color, religion does not equal to child harm. The pathology narrative of brokenness is the historical narrative of child welfare in the United States. We always approach this concept of helping children with the need to also say something is broken. Think about all the things that have happened in our own families that just happened. Regardless of how much wealth you have, bad things happen to all families. It didn't mean that something was broken. Something just happened. We've got to retrain ourselves to think that when we see a need with a child, it does not mean that something is broken. It sometimes simply means that there is a need that needs to be met. Good intent and anecdote is not evidence. Evidence is evidence. We need more evidence, which is why the Family First Act, depending on where you stand, we asked for evidence. I mean, that was the longest battle we fought on that. We insisted that money should be tied to evidence. Government and charity is never a substitute for family, love, and belonging. Children's Village is a charity. We have huge government contracts. Many of you are charities. You have government contracts. We're no substitute for family. Not even close. On my best day at Children's Village, we suck when it comes to family. We can't do it. I wouldn't want my children at Children's Village. I wouldn't. I mean, look, we invest tons of money. We have beautiful buildings, great campuses, swimming pools. That's not family. That's not family. Long slide, I'll read it out. When it comes to the poor and the disenfranchised that we serve, we are bureaucratic, we have no customer service, we are horrible. No one gets treated in our system the way I would want my family treated, not even on the best day. That is not because we don't want to. It's just because how the system works. Government and charity is burdensome, my friends. If you don't agree with me, raise your hand because I'd like to know how much of it more you want in your life. None of us wants more government and charity in our lives. That doesn't mean that charity isn't good. It doesn't mean that government isn't good. But we don't want it in our lives. We should not impose it on the families we serve. Amazing things happen to life when you're chosen and you're loved. Two important words in our work. Very few people choose our children. Very few people shake hands with our children. Very few people embrace our children. Our children are often not invited to places. They're not allowed. But think of your life just as mine. I am the product of people who chose me. People chose me. They chose me in Kansas. They chose me in New York. They loved me. They made me sit at the table. They exposed me. I am pretty unsophisticated, but not embarrassed because I've been around people that are sophisticated that have helped me not embarrass myself. So I'm confident. I don't need to pretend. That's how we get through life. Because people choose you and they love you to be part of something greater. If you don't know what it means not to be loved, at least think back to high school when you may not have been the smartest, coolest, best-looking person. Maybe many of you probably were, but I was not. If you're still confused by those slides, try to remember one thing. When it comes to the children and families we serve, they need the same things that you and I needed. We should give our families the same things we would give our own children. Nothing less. Love, belonging, access. I've got your back. Final slide. Relationships heal. Nothing heals pain but a relationship. Emotional pain does not subside in loneliness. It just gets worse. It just gets worse. Relationships heal. To anyone who tells you otherwise, call them a liar. Relationships heal. Nothing else heals. If we are not in the relationship game for our young people, we are lying to ourselves and to others. Thank you.